How do you say the right thing in tough situations? Have you ever wanted to say something helpful, but were unsure of it? Right? Life is complicated. We know that. And our words really do matter because we've had those experiences where words have helped or harmed ourselves. And we know that sometimes the things that we say have been helpful or harmful, that it's one of those things where words can be problematic or they can unlock new possibilities. And so when we find ourselves in those situations that are difficult, where we're like, I don't even know what to say, how do we get some guidance in those places? Buddha says, whatever words we utter should be chosen with care, for people will hear them and be influenced by them for good or ill. Words are powerful. And so how do we know what to say, the right thing to say when the situation is complicated? So Proverbs 27:17-18 gives us a sense of that when it says, turn your ears and hear the words of the wise. Focus your mind on my knowledge. It will be pleasant if you keep the words in you, if you have them ready on your lips. Listening for wisdom. That's the first thing it says. The next is focusing on God's knowledge, which we may be going, okay, well, what's God's knowledge? God's knowledge is love, hope, peace, joy, patience, encouragement. God's knowledge helps us see our way through or find a way through, helps us navigate. Keeping God's words on our lives and then keeping God's words on our lips. And so some of the words that I just used in relation to focusing on God's knowledge, right? Those are words of God to keep on our lips, to write upon our lives. But backing up to listening for wisdom, not listening to respond. And that does two things right there. If we're listening for wisdom, if we're going, okay, let me gain some understanding about this, let me gain some knowledge, it also allows others to be heard. So often we want to respond quickly, like we're listening to respond. In fact, Sinek says there is a difference between listening and waiting for your turn to speak. What would it mean to take up the practice of listening for wisdom? And you may be going, okay, well, what does that begin to look like? What if when we're listening, we nod and at the most say, okay, and that we only begin to respond when we are asked to respond? To actually take a breath there. So something to kind of guide us of what we can practice, of taking more time to go, wait a minute, let me just listen before I say anything. And then focusing on God's knowledge, right? Especially focusing on God's knowledge before we speak, before we use our words, taking that breath once again. And what do we understand? Maybe where is God guiding in this moment? Or what would God's love look like in this? What would God's peace? What would God's patience? What would God's presence of joy look like in this moment? In the words that I speak. Lao Tzu says, kindness in words creates confidence. Kindness in thinking creates profoundness. Kindness in giving creates love. Now, keeping God's words in ourselves and on our lips, that also takes a lot of practice. All of these things take a lot of practice and take an everyday that we are going to get focused on, we are going to pay attention to, we are actually going to commit ourselves to working on it. And to think about how we keep those words at the ready. Like, am I living into love? Am I living into peace? How are my words encouraging? Is that what I'm living? Is that what, in all of this, it's a struggle, right? Where sometimes we're going to get it and sometimes we're not. But what does it mean to begin to pursue it? Because if we're practicing all of these things, what's going to happen is that when we are struggling, when the situation is complicated, when we're like, what in the world, is there anything I can say? It actually helps us and focuses us in new ways. When we're focused on God's knowledge, when we're focused on God's words, when we are focused on being able to, wait a minute, Let's listen for some wisdom. Let's listen for some wisdom that brings insight and understanding before a response. Pray with me. Gracious God, so often we find ourselves in tough situations and we aren't sure what to say, or we say the wrong thing and wish we could have had better words. Help us, oh God, to take the practices of listening for wisdom, focusing on your knowledge and keeping your words in ourselves and on our lips. Help us in our everyday lives as we try to find the right things to say. Help us to know when to be silent, when to offer a word of encouragement, and what words would be most connected to you.